Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening, Mr. Gerima. Again, it's such an honor to be in conversation with you. You are one of my heroes, so thank you for the time.
Thank you, sister.
Yes. So we are doing this Q&A in front of an audience that has just seen SANKOFA. I'm curious, just to start us off, can you please talk about the journey to creating this film and the kinds of things that you were thinking of when it came to the film's inception?
Well, when I started the film, I was a film student at UCLA, and it was at a time I wanted to develop the actual screenplay that was roaming in my, imagination, and but at the same time, it was very, very uncomfortable. It was very warped because I was departing from the plantation, of what I call the plantation school of literature, meaning that the African-centered story or the African-centered story doesn't exist. Slavery is historically documented from the plantation school's perspective. And therefore, I was contaminated by that perspective. And that perspective assumes that Black people didn't have the enzymes of wanting to be free. They were just at the mercy of the good and bad and ugly of white power. And so I was operating in that milieu, and it was throughout uncomfortable, because it's very hard to accept that historical interpretation of enslavement, because the very idea coming from Africa, and at the time I was at UCLA, which is a few years from Chicago, I had entered the environment of liberation, the Black Power movement, the Black Panther movement, the African liberation movement, and it didn't jive well with that. So I had to liberate myself first, my mindset, in trying to really shape the script. And so the early script, I always told people I would have been stoned to death by African descendants if I had made that film. But I think I was very fortunate to be around the environment of liberation, the aesthetic liberation of Black literature, African literature from the continent, the Latin American, etc., all added up to help me shape another version of the script, meaning where the battle of slavery is wanting to be free. The battle of enslavement is the enslaver wanting to create a slave entity, and the enslaved refusing to accept that entity, and therefore slavery. Therefore, I arrived to a point that dictated my writing, whereby brutality in slavery is a result of resistance. And that's where I honed in. Once I got that, I got better. So the script, however imperfect it is, the film, it benefited from this whole struggle. And the other part of it is, having come from Africa, but very colonized. It's not the way I sound now. I'm more coherent now, thanks to the liberation struggle of the African people worldwide. I have a different, my mouth is different, my brain is different. But at the time, I was a very colonized person when I first hit Chicago. And so in my own colonial framework, I didn't know, at the time I came to Chicago, African descendants were called Negro Americans. And that's how I came from Ethiopia, Negro Americans. And that itself is a very demented perspective, meaning like they didn't come from Africa, but they were sprouted out of the experience of enslavement. That itself just decapitates Africa. And so, all the struggle I have to wage was personal, to get to the creative process of the script, the shaping of the script, the aesthetics, and the language of the expression that resulted into what you saw. Imperfectly, but it went in the direction I struggled to get to it. So basically, that's one. The other part of it is, it started out with Nunu and Joe, as a symbolic of the diaspora and the African continent. And she symbolizing, because the brutality of Africans in America came as a result of the Africanness of them, even the physical, ostracizing of the physicality of Africans, from skin to hair to lips to hair. Everything comes to destroy the African map in the African people's spirit and soul. And so the battle begins in physical and mental. And that itself is symbolized in the two characters when I started out, even though the script was really still working from the plantation school of literature, the aesthetics I'm talking about. And I've said enough, I hope to get going, but that's basically the genesis of it.
And I know when this film first came out, you had to put it up and rent out theaters to get people to see it. And you speak about, the Black community really coming up and heralding the film in ways that championed the film in those early days. Can you talk about what the audience taught you about Sankofa?
Well, first, the film, we made it, my wife and me co-produced it in Ghana and Jamaica, although we wanted to shoot it in Louisiana. Racism, again, impossible. And so when we came out at the Berlin Film Festival, we were very, very, if you look at the history of that period, we were the most prominently expressed or prominently outlined in the festival as a very interesting film. And yet the American press completely excommunicated us. They didn't mention it, that we were in the festival, etc. Even after that, in Montreal and Toronto, they did not. And so after that, we went to the Black community here in Washington, D.C., because this is where we have come. This is where we also practiced community distribution of films by something we started by the 80s, where we distribute African and African-American films to institutions and museums, etc. So we have built a community of people, and we called them and we showed them and say, if you can't show us, if you can't help us show this film, our energy is, just sapped. We can't do nothing. I myself, especially, I was over with it. So the community built a thing they called the SANKOFA family. And then the day it opened, it was a whole parade from the Ghanaian embassy to the theater. Africans lined up for miles, drumming, pouring libation before we started the film. And after that, Black people in America put it on the map of the world, and the film went as far as it could have gone at that time.
Yeah. And with all of those different showings, did you learn something new from the people who were watching the film? Something you didn't even realize when you were making it?
Oh yeah. No, to me, especially in rhythm and structure. For example, at one time in Harlem, I was showing the film there, and the audience and me, I realized how a certain cut I have made rhythmically completely was out of line, the flow of the audience. But this I began when I was doing my early films. When I first made my first, Child of Resistance, let's say, or Hourglass, I didn't even know I was a filmmaker. It's like it's a license for white people. And so when Black people in Oakland embraced me and said, "You are our filmmaker," then I said, "Oh, maybe I'm a filmmaker." And that's really where I got my encouragement started coming up. And so I would say my relationship with the African American community especially was learning, how to harmonize my own interest in my cinematic accent, or what I would call the narrative logic of my story, as it navigates and negotiates within the community. So I am a student of the Black community audience. Every film I made, I subjected myself to a critical, not only me, but I think it was a tradition of many of the filmmakers like Charles Burnett, Larry Clark. We were showing our films in the Black community and get, feedback, etc. Critical feedback was part of what I think the time was about in the 1970s, especially, to get feedback from the community you claimed the subject matter is from, taught you a lot about filmmaking itself. And so I remember writing a paper I called Triangular Cinema. I felt egotistically the African filmmaker or the Black filmmaker isolated, making a film and sending it by Federal Express is no new cinema. I felt the audience, the community, and the film expressor, and the film critic, if they're liberated also, can create the transformation of their cinematic culture. And that was my early 80s. I was writing notes and papers and presenting debate and argument on what I call triangular cinema, meaning you cannot, the filmmaker alone can't create art. You express your art from the faculty of your imagination. And then when you deliver, when you take that in, subject it to the community, you learn your own imperfection. You learn your own, even the affirmation of your own cinematic accent. And this I have always believed and try to, do it in Africa as well.
Yeah. I'm going to read something back to you that I've heard you say, because it speaks to what you are saying now, but I want to hear more. And you say of your early days of filmmaking that you couldn't understand why it was that so many good people could watch a film about an oppressed young girl, let's say, and then after go wine and dine. I had a problem with that. It made me think maybe the story is passive, not disrupting the way of life. I want my films to haunt the audience all the way to their bedroom. And so if you could speak to this idea of passivity and what it means for you to kind of imbue activity into your films.
Well, fundamentally, if we, I know, people could disagree, but fundamentally, the arcing of the cinema, the 3-act, when it became 3-act, unlike even earlier cinema, once Hollywood producers became lawyers and became the dictatorships of what cinema should be, we went into a formula cinema that pacified audiences. From the active relationship, we went into a passive relationship, meaning that you start a film by acclimating the audience, by pacifying them, and all they could do, anything active, is chew popcorn and drink the Coke and hit the hot dog. But in terms of content transactional relationship, it is a very passive idea. This is the dictatorship of Hollywood globally. The global power of Hollywood is this passive relationship with audiences, making audiences passive and superimposing on them by communicating their right to participate actively. And so for me, if the film doesn't nudge you to reactivate you, to make you an equal partner, it's a one-way dictatorship. And this is Hollywood's success globally. They have made, even the way they started a credit, it's no more my film, when you say you or me, how do I start once upon a time? Not by formula, but how is my accent? My grandmother around the fire, she started a story in a different way, sometimes poking the fire and glittering of flames jumping about. And this formula of pacification of the by the Eurocentric typical musical beginning with the credits, I couldn't have done, Ganaba, the drummer, the divine drummer, starts the whole thing. Oscar Brown Jr. reading that poetry. That's to me how I want to come in. And so to me, the success of Hollywood, because it is an imperialist cultural power over global expression of cinema, it has pacified audiences to be passive buyers of capitalism, materialism. And so the battle, when I remember as a student, most of us, if we were watching Cuban, Latin American, Argentinian, Chilean cinema, there was a whole struggle going on to liberate this passive relationship of the spectator and the expressor. And so for me, it has been my frustration. I don't want to make a film to help the capitalist after, seeing an oppressed person of my people to go into his whining and dining. I want to hound him to his bedroom if I could. I don't think I have succeeded to do that, but I would like to haunt the careless, numb Black bourgeoisies in Africa who excessively, obscenely live at the, in the face of all this poverty. I would like to haunt them. I want my story to haunt them because the oppressed people's story haunts us every day, but we shut it off. We shut it off by passive cinematic or cultural environment. And so, yes, did I succeed? No, it's an imperfect journey that I have been trying to do. Otherwise, I wouldn't make a film. I would be an entertainer and a comedian. I would not want to make a film. I want intellectual, democratic relationship with human beings. I have my observation that comes out of the faculty of my imagination. I want it to come out as is. I want to defend my narrative identity. I don't want to imitate white supremacist narrative cultural monopoly. And this to me is where I stand and where I am.
That clash is also ever present in your ability to not let us necessarily relate to only one main character in the film. There are several characters that we follow and that we engage with. And I'm interested if and how the aspect of community when it comes to African culture, how that affected how you thought about character and protagonists and who was guiding us through the story.
Well, communal, again, the African communal culture is where I'm studying hard. It's a culture I neglected. I walked over to be a colonized person in the American landscape. But to me, to dump all the virtues or the evils on a single character is very typical Hollywood. The bad guy, the good guy, the black hat, the white hat. It goes back into Edwin Porter, Thomas Edison, Griffith, etc. I think, to me, some characters should be built on the arc of relay, like relay running. A baton is picked by a character, passed to a second character, and third. I try to do, for example, in SANKOFA, if you see the women, I have lined them up on a baton kind of way. The men, the same thing. I don't want one man suddenly to change and be revolutionary. That's instant coffee. That's instant Hollywood story. So what do I try? I try to make it a relay pass to characters on, and then the next character carrying over the germinating genealogy of those characters in communal, collective way.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you picked it up, but it's also very imperfect. That's why it's not picked well by many people.
What does it mean to decolonize oneself?
To
For you,
colonize oneself?
yeah, for you and your journey, when you were speaking of having a colonized mind, growing up, coming to America and having to figure those things out, were you doing that work through your films? How did that?
Oh, yeah.
For
Yeah.
you?
Because to me, I think it's, as you try to express yourself, you encounter the liberation process. But to me, it started out from the genesis of the story, the seed story. When I write a script, it begins, every script is an engagement of my own personal liberation.
Yeah.
I don't make a film, I don't just put together a story to people. The story has to do something for me too. I have to be transformed as a man, as a human being, as a Black person. And so, when you see of me, I am an English Empire colony. When I left Ethiopia, I came colony, first by the British, the British system of schooling, by the Americans who became, after the Second World War, the American Empire. I became a student of Peace Corps. to aspire away from my own cultural context. My father fought the Italians as a guerrilla fighter. I was a total contradiction. I believed, I worshiped white people. This is what American cinema and Hollywood and Peace Corps have done to me. Or I participated. I shouldn't say what they've done to me. I participated with my generation. That's why there's a whole lot of crazy thing going on in my country. We never dislodged ourselves from the British Empire's educational process that redesigned us away from our traditional school. And we hated, disliked our tradition. Even my grandmother, she's my original around the fire storyteller. I looked down upon her once I saw Hollywood movies. I couldn't, sit around the fire anymore like my sisters. I left her.
Yeah. I'd like to return to this idea of resistance, which is ever present in your films, specifically Sankofa, which we just watched. And I mean, I learned about you and your films through this prism of resistance. I mean, I remember when my professor said, we have to watch Bush Mama. That's the first film we're going to watch as part of our studies. But I'm curious for filmmakers like me and who are younger than me, older than me, coming up, do you think the kind of resistance and persistence that you needed when you first started making films is the same kind of one that we are having to grapple with? Is it different in any way?
Well, it's more complex for you guys. You guys are in trouble because it's become more complicated. It was simpler in my time, although I can't say it was simpler. I caught hell at UCLA, but it was not. You guys are more in trouble because the new technology has also complicated matter. I feel I'm glad I'm passing through soon, because to me, it's very hard on your generation. And I'm not even sure people are aware of that. I see it in my students. They face a much more complicated, it needs a much more uh, 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 alert generation to really know this uh, world of abnormality that pretends and impersonates normality in a very sophisticated way. I'm telling you, I have 6 kids I raised. I feel sorry for the world they're facing, because mine was easier, my sister. Mine was actually, and in fact, it was the time of liberation. It was normal. Yeah. Now it's very confusing. What is a liberation now? So I don't want to even go there, because it's up to you guys to define the circumstances and transform, dislodge yourself from it, and forge your future. But there was something you said when you started asking me. Can you remind me?
Was it what is it that the same, if you think the kind of resistance and persistence that you had is the same as what we are?
Well, I'll tell you this resistance, to me, for me, it was like this. It was, for example, in Sankofa, I said to myself, when I started writing the script, I was like, for a whole summer, I went into the 4th floor of UCLA where all slavery books were. And everything was stereotype, stereotype that Black people were passive entities of everything, every force that's coming, colliding toward them. When in fact, the history of the United States depended on Black people in America. If you look at everything, every constitution, every annexation of Louisiana or Mexico is connected to runaway Black people, which is a documentary I'm doing on. And so for me, the African that came, when you assume he was ignorant, he didn't know, you're going in the wrong direction. Where I busted out of my own imprisoned colonial status when I said, Haile, if it was you in that slave ship, okay, would you lose your name? Would you not resist? I was resisting once I realized I was colonized. And so why would I deny my characters that enzyme of wanting to be free? And so the subject matter teaches you. because you reciprocate your own personal self also. Would it be me? When you write a story even about women, you know, a man has to say, would she accept this? Would I accept this? Instead of saying, well, since she's a woman, she'll accept the stereotype. You have to completely negate your own tendencies, your own acclamations, your own colonial state of mind to liberate your pencil, your imagination, because that is where the trouble is. Our stories are prisoners of imperial order. And when you start to, when you start to say, I want to tell a story, you better begin the liberation process simultaneously. You can't just say, I'm FedExing a story to people. No, you have to say every utterance. In fact, when before you, when I'm working tonight, I'm working on a story I want to shoot as soon as possible. And in this script, basically, you know, I am growing as whatever age I am growing. My script is, and I told my wife a minute ago, I said, oh my God, you know, I wish I know what I know now when I was a teacher. I wish I know what I know now when I was a student at UCLA. But it's a process. So that every new script teaches me my own narrative identity, because the faculty of our imagination, my sister, is enormous. That's what we stifle when we submit. We actually curtail the role the faculty of your imagination wants to play in imagining and narrating a story.
Yeah. And
when we go into imitation cinema, that's what happens.
yeah.
Innovating cinema makes you constantly alive.
And to that point of stifling one's imagination, there's a moment in the film where Shola says to Shango, why don't you act right? You know, it doesn't take so much. Mm-hmm. And it got me thinking about, you know, this idea of resistance. And do you think it takes as much to resist as it does to comply?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. To comply, but first let me tell you, I think every Black parents, every black folks, for example, really do not sometimes want to share the true experience of their life, because they care. They don't want their kids to be lost. That's like when you love somebody, you don't want to lose them, and you become greedy. And I think that's where we have to confront, is the fact that we don't want to generationally transaction the true experience of the African people, because history makers come out of that. See, when Black people deny passing the history making process, because all those Black people tell you to be afraid of struggle, whatever, they made history, whatever, one way or another, they made history. You cannot imagine the history Africans have made, the journey they have gone through. But at the same time, they don't want their children to lose their life, their loved ones to lose their lives. But to me, that's when you miss. Loving is to pass and encourage and revive the history-making right and energy and imagination of young African people. That's the art has to do that. That capacity has to be unleashed. And revolution should not be feared if it is to bring history makers, because we live off history makers. Those are our vitamins. Every society's vitamins are history makers. Why do we pacify and excommunicate our history-making capacity? It has to be confronted within communities.
I do want to open up the conversation. I have one more question and then we'll do it. So fortunately, many more people have access to the film because it's now available on Netflix. And recently, you were also awarded the inaugural Vanguard Award, thanks to the Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences. Your story of having to put up the film and the resistance that was that the film got when it was first made. I'm curious about, almost 30 years later from when you first made the film, the reaction then to the reaction now. How does it all feel in terms of its, being kind of heralded in Hollywood and receiving the flowers maybe you didn't get when you first made the film?
Well, I will tell you this, my sister. I was a constant agony. One, because I couldn't forgive Hollywood because I'm not entitled to forgive Hollywood. I'm not entitled. I feel that the non-white people Hollywood destroyed for over 100 years, stereotyping and dehumanizing and disfiguring. From day one, the cinema was invented with the French filmmakers, Edwin Porter, Thomas Edison, Griffith. They all have disfigured the African people and Native Americans. I can't. I told them that. I'm just there, a stranger. And I'll tell you, I love Ava. Ava is why the film is now revived and being seen. And if Ava didn't ask me, I'm not the person who would be there. It was to the last minute, I was not in peace with it. I still do not, I don't even know, after that I came back to my cave in my editing room and I'm doing the film of the Maroons of the United States. I finished the Italian-Ethiopian War. So I'm busy with my life the way I was. It has not brought anything, changed anything. So to me, I think this is when sometimes when we're made to bite something, if you remember, I say that in Bush Mama, when you bite something that's offered, it's the end of yourself. I'm very sneaky about that. I came in carefully. I got the thing going because of what was happening, because I think the museum, in giving me the vintage award, I said to them, we'll see how you're going to preserve the African part of this history, the Native American part of this history. So I was not a good dinner party. I couldn't even eat that dinner they were displaying in that table. And so for me, I could not. History will not forgive Hollywood. White supremacy in Hollywood is a problem, that white filmmakers continue to recycle a white supremacist dictatorship in that cultural, circumstances. And therefore, white kids especially have to fight their own dictatorships' power to democratize that place, not me. I'm the last guy. But I'll tell you this, that the preservation of our films, I support. Yeah. The preservations of Usman Samben's film, I support, because we could lose it in Africa. I would like it to preserve. Medhondo, Safi Faye, her film should be preserved. And to me, I bit the bullet for that collective idea, because our films could be lost. Many African American films were lost, where they were not preserved. And so to me, the museum, I separate the museum from the Hollywood bombastic, toxic, loud world. I cannot function in a very, toxic environment of bombastic existence where everybody's bombastically loud-mouthing something. I like quieter place. That's why I'm in Washington. For film, I should be in New York or LA. No, I want to be as far away as I could, because that noise itself is dangerous. It sucks you in without you know. I've seen many students of mine sucked into that planet. Okay. Some are even dangerously positioned to suck me into it, and I fight them. I say, don't come like that. I miss you, I want to see you, but don't bring your Hollywood shit on me.
Thank you. Any questions in the audience?
Sorry for cursing, sister.
So, okay, just one quick thing. I'm going to pass around a mic. When I give it to you, just to make it easier, if you don't mind standing up and just looking towards the podium, that way it'll be a more sort of like direct conversation.
Haile Gerima. This is Henry Brown or Yone.
How you doing, my brother?
I'm good. So in this room, everyone, we worked on this film together almost 30 years ago. Thank you so much. I want to congratulate all of the noise that you said you don't like. But yes, I know you, brother, a little bit. I want to ask you this one question though. Do you think with this new release, we will see a conversation and a screening in Jamaica, where I am from and where we shot that film and where we had this amazing experience? Do you think we're going to have a conversation and any kind of screening in Jamaica outside of Netflix with you?
With pleasure, my brother, but you do it. I'm an old man. You take it. I will be there. The problem here is I will not go into why it is not so, because it's negative. I would not go there. I would be so happy because without that brother giving me that plantation land,
Long Span Sugar Estate.
yeah, I would not, because I was run out of Louisiana. So my brother, Jamaica is precious. Ghana is precious. The film is done because of this African individual people who are historically placed in the right place where they were not intimidated. And so, my brother, I dare you to do it. I'll be very happy.
So I'm gonna take your word on this. I will do Ghana and I will do Jamaica, and you're gonna be there.
Yeah. Now you're doing it in public, so don't hide.
Hey, we got it.
Next. Thank you, brother.
Hi, my name is Christian. Nice to meet you, by the way.
Nice meeting you.
My question is like, as an Ethiopian filmmaker, do you see Ethiopian cinema growing, and do you see any promising filmmakers from Ethiopia or Ethiopian Americans?
Well, my brother, first, I want you to know this. When I speak about cinema, I'm not positioning myself as making perfect cinema. This I want to be clear to young people. My films are imperfect, but I glory over my imperfection, because in my imperfection, I have found my own accent imperfectly. I'm still heading, trying to see where my narrative evolution is going. So let's get that right first. But the other part of it is not only Ethiopian, but the African cinema in the late 60s and 70s, in the time of Medhondo and Safi Fai and Usman Semben, okay, you can even include Thomas Sankara, was a liberation cinema. It was part of the liberation cinema of Latin America. Cinema Nova, Miguel Lutin in Chile, Sanjines and Solanas in Argentina, and Cuban cinema. It was a liberation movement. We were making anti-colonial cinema because our immediate story is in confrontation with colonialism. To date, it's not resolved. And so I consider most of what I see in Africa, including Ethiopia, is a passive, toothless cinema of imitation. To some extent, it's not even an imitation of cinema, it's an imitation of American decadent television. That's like the end of the road. In some cases, they even use the music from Hollywood, as if we never had a music in Ethiopia. We had music before America was born. And so you can see now how I feel about that in terms of Ethiopia. I think young Ethiopians have to challenge themselves. They cannot be Hollywoodian kind of filmmakers by posture, by the way they walk, by the way they call themselves filmmakers. I would like young people to say, I'm an aspiring filmmaker. I don't like, I'm a filmmaker. It makes you walk in a very grotesque way. That's what I see in Africa every time I go. And I hope you don't take me as a negative old man, but these are the facts. I've taught some at Howard. They've come to Howard. I've taught them in some schools I lectured, from CalArts to Germany to Egypt. I do not see, and whether it's about relationship, love, women, men, the idea is you're not making a movie to dictate love. I'm sorry. Let Hollywood do that. I want to know what you mean by love. What's your story of love? How do you incriminate yourself in your own sense of love, your sense of female and male? If you're not set out to challenge your own tendencies, but to make a package of filmmakers to passive audiences, I'm not sure that's a liberation process. It's an imperial process. And imperialism is not only with white people in Europe, but the African elite is an imperialist appendage.
Hi, so I'm wondering, in seeking to put forth an empowered image of Blackness, as you said you were trying to do with SANKOFA, I wonder why you decided to tell the story of a Black community that was not your own, rather than putting forth an Ethiopian story, when Ethiopia is such an empowered country in and of itself.
Have you seen my films like Harvest?
Well,
No.
No.
Answer me. Have you seen Harvest?
I have not yet had the chance to see Harvest.
Have you seen Teza?
I have not yet had the chance.
Have you seen Adwoa?
No, sir.
Excuse me, my brother, I will not answer you.
Okay.
Peace with you. Peace be with you.
Mr. Gerima.
Let me say something. African Americans in America embraced me. I have 50 years of experience from Chicago to Los Angeles. African American people, progressive American people, supported me and made me a filmmaker. I have a direct relationship with African American filmmakers. And also SANKOFA is made as an Ethiopian. I'm an Ethiopian, I'm not a Black American. My film, if you see the cinematic language, I will show you points where it is an Ethiopian culture. But I don't know why I'm going there, because you started out negative, my young brother. It's okay, go ahead. Next.
Yeah, Mr. Haile, you mentioned a couple of times about. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
my
You're
bad.
good. You're
No,
good. Yeah, you're fine.
No.
Hi, Haile. This is Ahmed Uthman. I was one of your students at Howard. It's nice to see you on the screen again. Hi, Adwoa. So my question has to do with your movement towards decolonizing your mind, because you talked about your story and how where you started from and what the environment was like for you as a filmmaker and as a Black filmmaker with the other Black filmmakers around that time, and how that helped in your transition to who you are as a filmmaker today.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. If you're talking about UCLA, USC is another story. I'm talking about strictly UCLA. There was a space at UCLA where they were bringing third world students from, students from different parts of Latin America, Africa, the Caribbean, etc. And they were also organizing African American students coming into the film school. There was a British Johnny, his name was somebody Young, very progressive British chairman of the department of the film department at UCLA. And there was this progressive interest in democratizing the film school from strictly white into multicultural. And at the same time also the whites, or the anti-Vietnam movement, the political environment, the Black Panther Party, the Black Power movement, all this, African liberation movement. There were movies coming from Latin America, especially into white American universities, which are not studied well, because I know many Hollywood filmmakers who were revived by these films from Brazil, from Bolivia, from Miguel Latin from Chile. Cuban filmmakers were very instrumental in this whole discourse of liberation movement. And then the African filmmakers also. Usman Samben had been in many film schools in the United States lecturing. And so there was a period of an environment of liberation, and it was normal to want to be free, okay? And so it's in that environment that we, the students that, like Larry Clark, who made Passing Through, a very important film about African-American film accent, Charles Burnett, To Sleep with Anger, Killers of Sheep, and so on, Ben Caldwell, etc. There were this, imperfect utterances of cinema complementing each other's frustration and alienation. Okay, and so you have to look at it without the black movement resisting and rising up. There is no black filmmakers. There's no, to me, there were in fact more, poets who are revolutionaries, like Haki, Sonia Sanchez, etc. But in terms of film, immediately film, inducts you into a bourgeois planet. It inducts you into a class of supremacist kind of idea. But the time was political in America. The 70s, late 60s was a very political climate. There were study groups with that we belonged in different kind of political dogma. And so that has to be looked into. I know there's this thing called the LA Liberate, what's called LA,
LA Rebellion?
LA Rebellion, yeah, etc. But it's a misnomer. But it was, to me, the African-American community that we were going to, for example, watch showing films and, having discussion. And to me, there was no filmmakers like that before. So we were going to the community and saying, go ahead, tell me what you think of my film. And the environment was very important to consider.
Thank you.
And I think more and more now, I don't see critical debate on cinema. Everybody's scared to critically, especially what I miss in Black cinema is debate. Now it's like landlordship. Everybody's squatting, saying, I'm this, I'm that, I'm this, I'm that. It's part of the intoxicated world that has hijacked it. But there's to me, what I miss is debate and discussions that helps one, acclimate their own liberation process, their own individual liberation process.
Haile, I heard you mention one time about a 3-act structure that Hollywood has adapted, and I was wondering about how you approach your storytelling.
Well, it's an antithesis to that, and I'll tell you, when I was a student at UCLA, some of those folks were there, and I refused to take their script writing class after a few encounters because they were literally making you toothless in the way they were advising you. So to me, 3-act is really, it came about to make it easy to producers who don't want to read no script. Just tell me the 3 points of this story. And so for me, the 3-act prevents your original narrative accent. And it's easy for every unchallenged teacher to go buy a secondhand book written by unemployed white filmmaker of how to write a screenplay and put it and impose it on young people. A formula, it makes it easier. For me, every human beings, including the white students and your classmates, etc., they come from somewhere. Mississippi, Oklahoma, Arkansas, they have their own accent. You see that in the literature of white America, Steinbeck, etc. Their accent is very distinct, whatever you think of their content. So for me, the 3-act stifles your narrative identity. Formula becomes the pacification of the rough edges of your narrative story. And so for me, what white people call primitive, like the drum is primitive, when Hollywood, when the drum from Africa came to Hollywood with King Kong and everything, drum meant bad thing is about to come. To this day, Hollywood uses it. When you want to scare the audience, the drum comes, it's the evil. Drum has when you study the drum, it has many functions. some is a talking drum, some is this, some is that. And so when you study and multiply the dimensions of drumming, you liberate yourself and use the drum appropriately. And so for me to, this whole formula literally mutes your nerve endings that might even surprise you, the individual. And so I always tell people, defend it without being defensive. Defend your identity, narrative identity, without being defensive. Defend your narrative accent without being defensive. When you have a religiously crusader, 3-act script writing teacher, you're in trouble, young person. You have to challenge that, because it could completely file and erase the best of you that makes you unique. And sometimes you want to be honest, that's why most films are passive and look alike. I'm sorry. Contemporary films, by and large, are passive and they look alike. You know why? Because individuals are not imposing their narrative accent. You look at early 1930, 1940 black and white Hollywood films, there are narrative identities, because they came out before the dictatorship of this 3-act cinema that has become and made everything look like cookie cutter. I don't know if I answered you. I'm sometimes all over the place. I'm sorry, but I hope I got to you.
Hello. Thank
Hi.
you for everything you do. You feel me? Quick question. You spoke earlier about just resistance, and the spirit of it, and that being the greatest threat to it being the fact that Black people and Black parents want to keep their kids safe, build a family, still have the right to certain joys and things that it's hard to do if you are walking through life eyes wide open. But you and your wife, of course, have done this dance together, hand in hand, and built a beautiful family. And I was wondering if you had any advice, how y'all balance it, and keep the dynamic alive, and honestly maintain bravery to do so.
Well, let me tell you, I'm not. I will not. It's not intended to impress you. I was in a film festival in Cuba, and I met Che's father, and that's the first thing I went on him. And the human part of the father is another story, sister. He's proud of Che, but he wished he was living and didn't lose him. And so even when I started reading him later, after I met his father, I realized that some of the letters start to make sense to me, the mother, the father. So to me, your parents have to care, but you have to also usher your own historical circumstances. You have to live not a regurgitated life of imitation. You have to live a life of innovation. That is exciting, sister. When I go to my editing room, that's what happens. I have 6 kids. It's not easy for me to hear if I hear my son or my daughters want to go to armed struggle. I'm not gonna lie to you. And their mother and me are filmmakers. We make films. She makes the same films we make together our films. And when it comes to our children, we are also greedily possessive. But to me, the world has lived off of, our struggle is a parasite of many parents' children who sacrificed their, their offsprings. But that's the life, that's the dialectics of life. And so for me, I've seen it in my own self, my own kids, etc. But I also do not want young people to just simply be blind adventurists. To me, change also has to have a human face. Okay, liberation has to have a human face. You can't be a fascist dogma and expect a human world of liberation. And so I'm telling you, I'm glad the films, my own films, have made me a better person, a better father, a better partner to my wife, my films. Because, you know, when human beings reach, when you start to express yourself, it's like knowledge comes when you physicalize what's in your head, your mental process. If we didn't reach for the fruit, we would not know nothing about thorns. It is the physicalization of love we realize what it means. So to me, when you make a film, when you sit down to write a story, my sister, I'm humanized by every story I sit down to write, which was happening before your event. I know they were, worried about being late. I was writing on my script. In fact, as my sister knows, at one point I went back to my writing. Didn't want to wait till you guys get it together. And so I would say this, but always be human, because capitalism and white supremacy dehumanizes your humanity. But don't let it allow, that's when they got you. But insist to remain a human at all great adversaries. And you will be a transformed human being, especially when you tell a story. You know, I'm telling you, I don't have no power over me. Not even Black people who I really love cannot tell me what kind of cinema to do. Too many bougie Black people you think can tell me what to do? No way. Because I know what they would want me to do. I know what kind of cinema. They like the imagination, or, whatever it is. I will never do a bid. I'll never submit my craft, my creative process to be a servant of the Black bourgeoisie in Africa or here. Never. But at the same time, every story I try to utter chisels me to be a better human being, not a passive human being, but an active human being.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so we have one last question. If you want to just jump in.
Hi, my name is Joan. I guess like in kind of hearing you speak about all your movies, and like I'll answer other questions, like the running theme is like resistance and reawakening from the colonial thought, and especially ones that are pervasive in Hollywood. So I was wondering kind of what your reaction was to seeing a foreign film like the Korean movie Parasite have such high success in American Hollywood, and whether that's something that is like an example of Hollywood slowly breaking away from its colonial thought and white supremacist ideas, or if that's something that's kind of face value and just a shallow movement that Hollywood is using as like to cover up its more, I guess, darker and evil perspective, I guess.
Yeah. I'll say this to you, my sister. Hollywood, by the way, is like, if I ask you to give me Hollywood's address, you would not be able to succeed. Hollywood is really a system, a mindset, a world outlook. Okay, so Hollywood is not like, it doesn't have an address. There's no an agent you can go to. There's many, voodooism going on about Hollywood. Hollywood is even moved internationally. It's gone into the international planet. It doesn't have an address, but it's a system. It's a formula. It's a mainstream formula that has succeeded to be the cultural maker of the salad bar of gratification in cinema. And it's basically, especially now, it's going so much into its guilt mode. It's specifically many who are not even the immediate representatives of that industry. There's a whole guilt. In white supremacy, what it does is every 20, 30 years, it recycles guilt and then mutates back into its powerful position, centrality. If you look at in Hollywood, when you look at a narrative, the principal centrality is white supremacist idea, even if it had colored people in it. Colored is an arrangement. Gender is an arrangement, because it's now the things you do, every script that's going on now, when I'm sent to look at, everybody wants to do what's now in gender terms, in sexual terms, in race terms. It's a whole mutated resurgency of white supremacy, in my view, because you can have, if the story is structured and written under the paradigm of the dictatorship of Hollywood, which is fundamentally white supremacist in the way it imposes principal character, the idea of sex appeal, the idea of personality and charisma. We clone races to fit those charismas. And so the very grammar has never changed. It could not change by the very system. The very system, what it does is, to buy more time, it regurgitates with a new fad. And so when we see, if I'm hungered of black person, I'm tired of driving Miss Daisy kind of formula, okay? I would have the woman, the principal character, the guy's driving, to be a transgender or an Asian or something to make it fit now. And so it's a very opportunistic, come together, forgive everybody situation. That's why I was saying to myself, I did not buy their honoring me. I know who was pushing me, because I do not believe that this industry, in the way it's founded over 100 years ago, the very grammatical inception of this industry and the way stories we're told are to be told does not change. It will never change. And I think, to me, outside counter cinema has to triumph, has to coexist, or at least exist to overcome the decadent industry. So even white students should think about counter cinema, telling their story counter from the existing, negating everything in how a film starts, stop the popcorn, chewing popcorn. We used to say when I was a student, we don't want color, how it begins a movie with popcorn chewing, etc. We just wanted to start it, my grandmother just coughing or something. And so to me, the cliches of how to start a movie, especially you young people at USC, have to question the historical attachment of USC to Hollywood. I know it's a whole lot of money you folks get. I've studied you guys a lot, but you have to question the power it has or what is being taught and who teaches there. And so, and I'm not saying revolt or anything, I'm just saying question it at least. And then whether it is any topic, if you miss left out, we started, in our friends of me, we were discontented colored people, Asians, Blacks, Chicanos, we got together, we just felt we did not exist in cinema. And we wanted to counter-present our humanity. That was not even a big proposal. Counter. We didn't say, let's exist like Hollywood. We wanted to be completely, sometimes irrationally even, but it's good to be irrationally against capitalism than easily submit and reassess your irrationality over time to center it back to a very, prudent way of struggling and waging your war, your cultural war. And so it's very, very important to be careful when it becomes fashion. The artist has to reject fashion. Fad is not a work of artists. Artists reject fad. Historically, the best of artists are anti-fad. When you join fad, you've joined the orchestration. You've joined the march. You've submitted. It is even better to be wrongly against the fad, because sooner or later you find your mission by being against it than join it and mutate and die. And so capitalism knows how to create fad. It makes abnormal things normal to you. Materialism is the biggest challenge young people are facing now, my own children. Materialism is a serious issue in young people's life. I remember, when life was easier, the things you buy was more economically thought out. Now, people don't even wash more things. I have kids who don't wash their clothes anymore, keep buying new stuff and throw the old. And then we have to ship it to a third world country. And so to me, I'm just saying, your generation, to all of you, you face a very complicated world. It's easy for me to talk stuff now. Unlike me, unlike my generation, you face a very complicated, elusive world that really is in bed with you every night. And that's what's, I think, a serious matter.
I'm surprised that the spirit of George Lucas didn't come and rip the Zoom connection in two by that amazing discussion of the Hollywood system and USC. I have to first also say, please tell Marawi that his friends at USC said hello.
I will. If he calls me. I will. But Johnny Simmons, I want to say something to you. When we were at UCLA, we used to look at USC like Siberia, but there was this one black guy we knew who was there. And it's later when we finally hunted him down, and he's now my best friend.
Thank you so much for giving so much of yourself tonight. Nana, thank you so much for this wonderful interview. And clearly we need to bring more of your films here so that everyone can get a chance to see them. Am I right in thinking that Array has also, that there's more than one restoration?
Yeah, they're working on many of my films. We're going to distribute them through them. And there's a restoration going on. Wilmington 10 was restored, and it showed at the Academy, and it's showing in some museums. And Shariki Anna's film also, Through the Door of No Return, is being restored by the Academy. So yes, most of them are coming. And if Ava is not tired, we're bringing more stuff from the basement of our our building and dumping it on them.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing the end result of all of that painstaking work and bringing it here for our students, for the new generation. Thank you so much. This is really incredibly special, and I appreciate it.
And thank you, folks, for having me. And I hope I didn't alienate anybody, but I usually live my life like this, and so they have a taste of me. This is me. If I change myself, I would be long gone dead. So thank you for having me, seriously. The discussion was very enlightening. I myself am revitalized. I'm going back to my script. I don't think I can go back to bed, so I'm revived. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.